Ashura. Every land is Karbala. Hussain, 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 Hussain. We love Karbala, we adore you, Hussain. Hussain, 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 Hussain. We love Karbala, we adore you, Hussain.
With the color of pure love, Hussain, Hussain is written in our blood. Hussain, one must feel his extreme pains, Hussain, to discover his humanly gains.
Hussain, Hussain is in our soul. Hussain, Hussain, Karbala is in our hearts. Hussain, Hussain,
Hussain is in our soul, Karbala is in our heart.
Every day is Ashura. Every land is Karbala. Hussain, 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 Hussain. We love Karbala, we adore you, Hussain.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I think we have to start because we're already late, half an hour. We should have started at 2 o'clock. My apologies at the outset for starting because two speakers have just texted me that they're on their way, and it always happens. Doesn't matter what you organize, when you organize, people do get late for some reason or the other. But Stephen Farrell is our first speaker who's on our way. He has, in fairness, he had a service this morning in his church in Rathgar, Church of Ireland. But I'm really grateful. So I really welcome most of the people who made it so far on time. So welcome to the 12th Annual Imam Hussain Conference of Ireland. This is something which we do every year in the month of Safar and in the month of Muharram. But Muharram will get very busy the first month of Islamic calendar. With our activity is so intense and programs are so intense. So usually it happens around the Arba'in time, which is the month of Safar, the second month of Islamic calendar. So basically what happens is that we try to explain to some people that this is an important occasion, and this year RTE Radio 1 has a Leap of Faith program that has broadcasted on Friday the big piece about Muharram, about Imam Hussain, about the occasion every year. This year particularly we have chosen the theme of the relevance of Karbala and Imam Hussain and his peace effort. I think peace is in dire currency at the moment worldwide, and for many years I think peace is something which we have to work towards. And then I'm fortunate enough to have another speaker who is on his way as well, Pat Hines, who belongs to the senior member of the Fianna Fáil government, and he had been doing a peace effort of North and South for many years, and Pat and myself are working on many platforms together to achieve the peace in this little island of Ireland. And so therefore he will be talking about his experience linking with the Imam Hussein's story and the history of Muslims of the time. What can I say about Imam Hussain and our history of 1400 years? 1400 years have passed of this occasion, which has been a very important occasion for all Muslims and non-Muslims, because that event actually changed the history of the face of Islam, in fact. And Islam did progress in many directions in the last 1400 years. But how and what had happened in the body of Islam is very important. So basically what I said is that we are just introducing the concept of the history of Karbala, history of Imam Hussain, the grandson of Prophet Muhammad, who had laid down his life and his family's life and his companion's life, his children's life, for the sake of the preserving of the true face of Islam, which was at that time in a very dire challenges, and he was facing a lot of challenges from the current tyrant who was ruling the area, and he was cornered, put against odds to accept something so-called oath of allegiance, which was not the right thing for him to do because he was a the grandson of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And he said at the time, he said, a person like me can never accept an oath of allegiance for a person like you, who you are, who's forcing me to accept this oath of allegiance is something is not going to happen. Else, he had to pay the price. And that was the norm on those days when humanity was not came to that level of sort of, working peace with people and working in harmony with dialogue, and civilization was perhaps not at the stage where the tolerance was not there. And therefore, he was trapped in the place called Karbala, which is a very well-known city now in Iraq. The gruesome tragedy took place. What the followers of Hussein and the family of Imam Hussain, the Ahlul Bayt as we call it, the Sayyids who come from the lineage of that family, do remember every year, not only them, but the big masses of people all over the world. Now we're talking about almost 335 million people all over the world in major countries such as in the Middle Eastern countries, Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Iraq, obviously, Lebanon, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, which has a large population of the followers of Ahlul Bayt. More so the immigrant community in North America, Europe, Scandinavia, everywhere people are organizing on a large scale compassionate ceremonies, which was the a tradition that these ceremonies should be organized, and the history of Islam must be articulated in these ceremonies. Usually these ceremonies are closed ceremonies for the followers of Ahlul Bayt and the followers of those who respect Ahlul Bayt from all traditions would come to those ceremonies, but is still restricted to Muslims. However, my effort has always been to communicate this message to beyond our community and cross the communities now we are living and working as interfaith communities. And therefore the work of Interfaith Forum, Dublin City Interfaith Forum, comes very much in the picture. The Three Faith Forum, whom I'm a member, a founding member of Jews, Muslims and Christians, is very important. And in the previous years, we had been lucky enough to have many members of the Three Faith Forum to attend these ceremony of the Imam Hussain Conference, Annual Imam Hussain Conference. This year, a lot of people are traveling to Palestine. They're going on tour, so therefore not available. Reverend Desmond Cinnamon is traveling, Canon. He's traveling as well. But we're lucky to have wonderful speakers this afternoon, and we will start with our youth speakers, whom I always promote and push for our youngsters, our youth speakers, that they should know themselves. And we're really blessed that high school, who is a very big school, secondary school, who comes over here, the children, the school teacher brings, and we have lectures like our colleagues across the road, up the road in Clonskeagh, have school trips. We have school trips as well. And we introduce the wider, all broader spectrum of Islam in its all entirety. And that is something that unless people would understand other communities, other faiths, within faiths, so-called intra-faith and interfaith, both is equally important, because if the discussion remains in one faith, it doesn't permeate on a grander scale. So this is very important, that we must continue to pay attention to the story of Imam Hussain and the history of Imam Hussain and the history of Karbala. Just to let you know that this is an occasion of Arba'een, which is the 40th day of the martyrdom of Imam Hussain, which comes every year. And people from all over the world travel to Karbala, the city of where the shrine of Imam Hussain is there. This document cover page has got the shrine picture of Imam Hussain, so please do take one if you want to take that. And people from all over the world, at least almost about 18 to 20 million people are traveling, walking by foot from this, the largest gathering on earth, the pilgrimage gathering on earth, which gathers on every year, attracts people from Middle East, Far East, Europe, North America, and Scandinavia. The flights normally cost 400, 500 euro, now costing something 1400 euro, 1500 euros. To direct flights to Najaf, which is the city beside Karbala, which is also a holy shrine place for the father of Hussain, Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib. That is also a very significant shrine. And people are traveling to those and remembering that. It wasn't possible in the context of the historical background, if I do mention, it wasn't possible at the time of the ruling of Saddam Hussein, when he was that cruel tyrant were ruling very with the iron fist. People were not allowed, and it was something was not possible for people. It has happened in the history in the past, and just to mention the history of Imam Hussein's shrines visit, that rulers in the past used to demand, if you are bringing 4 children with you to have a pilgrimage to Imam Hussein's tomb, and they'll said, we have to kill 1 or 2 children, and people will gladly offer those children. If you're walking yourself, they said you have to lose your hand or your foot, then I would allow you to. This cruelty prevailed in the past for the sheer, for those people who just want to go there, pay their respect, do the ziyarah citation, and walk away and remember the gruesome tragedy of Imam Hussain. The history of Karbala is full of blood. In our lifetime, we have seen the 11 years, 12 years of war between neighboring 2 countries, Iran and Iraq, where millions, not 1 or 2, but 3, 4 million people have sacrificed their lives. So it is extremely important why we bother about talking about it, because I think the region is blessed with the resources, and the natural resources has always been the reason for the foreign forces to go there and to control and exploit the oil. And that was the only reason. Religion has never been the question. However, religion has been used as a pretext, to an excuse to create a war between the people. But the bottom line was to control the resources so we can exploit the resources of the place and continue our lives. Anyway, that's a very detailed background. If you really want to dabble, you all perhaps know. This occasion is the conference is on the occasion itself and the time of Imam Hussain. What happened at that time? Why that led to the gruesome tragedy. The peace effort that his grandfather, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, started during the time of his existence, continued with his first Imam and the successor, Ali ibn Abi Talib. He created some sort of a peace effort during his lifetime. Again, he was being persecuted, hunted down, and that continued with his son, 2 sons, Hassan, older son, and the younger son, Hussein. So that it culminated to Hussein, and therefore Hussein becomes the epitome of this sacrifice. Without losing too much time, I think I'll start the actual body of the discussions with youngsters. So I think you're the first one to go, or Kazim would like to go to first? You're the laptop first. Okay. So I would like to invite Zaman Zaidi, who can do the first speaker from high school, to talk about his paper and his presentation. Salli ala Muhammad wa ʿAlī Muhammad. This is the tradition. We say salawat. This is called salawat, and every time we say that, we just repeat that. So this is the small tradition for Stephen to introduce. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming along. And once we would have a younger speakers, and then we would have the main body of the senior speakers. Thank you.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum everyone. My name is Zaman Zaidi, and as you can see from the slide above, I will be talking about the peace mission of Imam Hussain. Why or how had this mission begin? The peace mission of Imam Hussain dates back to the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, with the enmity between him and Muawiyah. This same enmity continues on down through the life of Imam Ali alayhi salam and to his eldest son Imam Hussain alayhi salam. Imam Hussain, who was living in Medina at the time, had witnessed the unjust behavior of Muawiyah and took it upon himself to correct these wrong teachings. Imam Hussain did not do so in any violent manner, but instead signed a peace treaty with Muawiyah in which he had to agree to three main terms. The first term being that Muawiyah had to promise to not use any abusive language towards the family of Ahlul Bayt and Imam Ali after Jumu'ah prayer. The second term being that Muawiyah had to assure the safety of the followers of Ahlul Bayt from any dangers. The third term being that Muawiyah was not allowed to appoint anyone as his successor after him. Although Muawiyah had agreed to these terms in front of Imam Hussain, he was not planning on following them. It was Muawiyah's desire to appoint Yazid as successor after him, as he did start a monarchy campaign. For these desires to be fulfilled, Muawiyah knew he had to kill Imam Hussain. So with the help of Jadda, who was from the Bani Umayyah clan and was Imam Hussain's wife, they poisoned Imam Hussain. Yazid took this opportunity to forcefully impose his rule and become the leader. Just before Imam Hussain had passed, he had appointed Imam Hussain, his younger brother, as the third Imam. News spread of the third Imam, and Yazid sends Walid, the governor of Medina, on a message. The message read that Imam Hussain had to accept the oath of allegiance and accept Yazid as ruler. Imam Hussein's response was, "A person like me can never give the oath of allegiance to a person like him." Upon hearing Imam Hussein's response, Yazid sent out spies to kill Imam Hussain. Imam Hussain learned of these spies and left Mecca for Kufa. From here, the peace mission begins. Imam Hussain addresses the crowd, and I quote, "Innama kharajittu lit'albi islahi fi ummati jaddi wa abbi," which translates to, "I have only risen to rectify and reform the affairs of the ummah of my father and grandfather." Imam Hussain did defend the peaceful message of his grandfather in the Battle of Karbala against the ruthless army of Yazid, but was sadly martyred with his companions and family members. If there's anything that we can take out of the peace mission, is that we cannot accept oppression and unjust rule. Although Karbala was a military defeat, it was a spiritual victory, and Karbala today is the purest example of amal bil ma'ruf wa nahy anil munkar, enjoining good and forbidding evil. Thank you for listening.
Now I'd like to invite the second speaker, Kazim Haider, who would present his discussion and his talk. Kazim, so thank you.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. All praise belongs to Allah, the Lord of the universe. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. When preparing for this speech, I struggled. Imam Hussain alayhi salam, he's the grandson of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Imam Hussain has such a personality that even after 14 centuries, historians are finding new meanings and lessons that are relevant today from 1400 years ago, the same challenges faced by Muslims and humanity in general. So the question arises, was Karbala just a battle? A battle between two so-called princes? Was it a power struggle between Imam Hussain and Yazid? Absolutely not. So in order to understand this particular matter, or a state of affairs, you have to have a deeper reasoning and underlining its existing form and characteristics that gave the specific appearance. You should also be conscious of the material causes of this matter, or issues, its constitutions, or ingredients. In other words, you need to know the forces or the causes that produced this revolt or uprising, which signified the truth. We call these causes at work. And the second is the collision of good versus evil, epitomized in a massacre never witnessed in history on so many fronts. This is what we witnessed in Karbala. On one side, you have the worldly, materialistic strengths of power, greed, and obsession, while on the other side, you have universal principles of truth, freedom, social justice. These are under the flagship of humanity. Different phenomena vary as to their realities. Similarly, every uprising or revolt is unique as to the truths underlining its eruption and its eventual success or otherwise. Imam Hussain alayhi salam's revolt was not the result of an angry outburst or prompted by the pressure exerted by the Umayyad ruler Yazid. Rather, it was a very well thought through move. What substantiates the position of Imam alayhi salam took in regard was the letters he exchanged, the sermons he gave on different occasions, and especially the one where Imam Hussain alayhi salam addressed the companions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, in Mina, which is in present-day Saudi Arabia. The Imam was fully aware of what he was intending to do, taking on the ruling establishment. Imam Hussein's revolt was free from any angry reaction. Rather, it was a purely Islamic uprising. Let's look at Imam Hussain alayhi salam's revolt from another perspective, the way the Imam was treating his followers. One can only come out with one conclusion, that the Imam was determined not to let the feelings of his companions run high, in a bid to avoid the revolt earning any description of one who is short-tempered. We see that Imam Hussein's repeated attempts to appeal to his companions, to leave his company with a view to sparing them the fate that awaited them all. The Imam used to remind them every now and then that they should not expect any materialistic gain in their march except death. Nowadays you can't find a leader who aspires to utilize the dissatisfaction of his people to push them to revolt, who talks in the same way Imam Hussain alayhi salam was talking to his companions. It is true that he was responsible for outlining to them their religious duty to rise against the tyrannical rule, in that resisting injustice and repression is such an obligation they have to discharge. Yet, he was seeking that his companions should discharge their responsibilities on their own record, without coercion. After he commended his companions, and I'm about to finish in 2 minutes, so after commending his companions, describing them among the best of his friends, the Imam pleaded with them one last time on the evening of the 10th of Muharram, to leave if they so wished, making it clear to them that they would be safe, as Yazid was only looking for the Imam's head alone. So that was why the Imam reiterated to them to melt away from the battlefield under the cover of darkness, because the enemy was not going to pursue them had they taken flight, nor did Imam want to force them to fight. Further, the Imam advised them that he would absolve them from their oath of allegiance to him, should they have chosen to forsake him, in that he left it to their own consciences. So that is, whichever way they decided, it had to be dictated by siding with the right, without compulsion, either from Imam Hussain alayhi salam or from the enemy. It would be their choice alone. However, their decision would remain with the Imam, and Imam gave the martyrs of Karbala. This is why we give the martyrs of Karbala the high regard. So Imam spoke in his address to Hur. So Hur was a military general of Yazid's army, but soon he moved over to Imam Hussein's army. So he spoke to Hur and his companions about how they had been incumbent on Imam by Islam, and on the basis of which he performed jihad against the tyrant regime of Yazid. Imam said, "O people, the Messenger of Allah, peace be upon him, has said, one who sees a tyrant ruler considering the unlawful things lawful, ignoring the command of God, opposing the practice of the Messenger of Allah, and deals with people in a sinful or oppressive way, but by word or action he does not object to it, the Almighty Allah has the right to convey him in his place. It was obligatory on the Imam, as the representative of his grandfather, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, to rise up against Yazid, a regime which considered the unlawful things lawful, trampled the laws, and opposed the practices of the Messenger of Allah, peace be upon him. That is why we see various Muslim scholars who have clearly stated that it is obligatory for the Imam to start a jihad in defense of Islam. The sacrifices made by Imam Hussain alayhi salam and his companions in the Battle of Karbala demand promotion of tolerance, peace and brotherhood among their followers. So I just want to end my speech with a quote from Imam Hussain alayhi salam. If you don't believe in any religion and don't fear the day of resurrection, at least be free and noble in this world. Thank you for your time.
What a noble way to end the quote from Imam Hussain, alayhi salam. May I request now Zishan Ali to come forward and present his paper. Zishan, thank you very much.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. And for those of our non-speaking Arabic friends, in the name of God, the Beneficent, the Merciful. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And this utterance that I've given is basically agreeing amongst Muslims in which we extend peace to one another. This is in line with the topic that I have in hand today, which is peace. But before I begin, I would like to once again invite all of you who have made the effort to join and commemorate this event. I would like to thank the previous speakers for their informative presentations and aspects of their perceptions and the importance of their event from their perception and how it can relate to an outlook of certain scenarios of leadership, courage, sacrificing and various other aspects. Over the previous years there have been a multitude of themes which have been covered. However, they all have an underlying tone as to the relevance of Imam Hussein's sacrifice in today's era. Today I will aim to highlight the importance of this event in the context of finding peace, not only within ourselves, but how we can attempt to manifest this into reality through the blueprints which are provided to us through the historic yet relevant event which took place approximately 1400 years ago. Today, one of the buzzwords that generally follows us and bombards us from all aspects of the media is one of peace. Unfortunately, it is a shame that the notoriety of this word is not for the abundance that there exists of it in the world, but rather the lack thereof. We are in a situation where there exists an abundance of hostility and a lack of peace. From my reading of world history, it seems that the world in general has never been a more alienating and solitary place for its citizens, irrespective of race, religion, or political affiliation. Suicide and depression rates are increasing. Instances of hate crimes are increasing. Political affiliations are at boiling points. Governments are being held financially hostage, and justice, by a lot of standards, has been left at the wayside. The world is divided based on ideologies. Government parties are dividing the people instead of uniting them. Isms of various proportions are the dominating realities in our day-to-day lives, and unfortunately various religions have also become embroiled in this tactful game of division instead of unity. In short, we are in a world dominated by individuals ascribing themselves to specific identities, whether religious or political. We are living in a world of modern-day tribalism. I understand the image I paint of the world is one of bleakness and misery. However, I also understand that it is only in desperate times that humanity can highlight the greatest of its attributes and qualities. Although it is difficult, Karbala teaches us that all that is required is generally a single or a group of people who share a collective, unselfish and harmonious vision, not only for themselves but of the world. Sometimes as Muslims we describe Islam as a religion of peace, to answer critics and negative perceptions of our religion. However, we find that in the media, acts are in turn not attributed to peace, but instead of barbarism. It is important to realize that Muslims themselves have attributed to several dark instances of Islamic history, of which many consider the martyrdom of Imam Hussain to be the greatest. A day in which the very grandson of the Prophet was massacred alongside his family members, companions, and an instance in which any remaining women and children alive had to endure various ordeals aside from being taken captive, beaten, insulted, and imprisoned. This event was not only perpetuated by Yazid, but rather this massacre was carried out by people who identified as Muslims. The mistreatment of women and children was carried out by people who identified as Muslims. This once again blurs the line between a religion associated with peace and instead paints the followers of Islam as barbaric individuals. This stigma is only reinforced in the modern context due to the various atrocities which are being perpetuated by people who identify as Muslims. The bombing of innocent Yemeni civilians is carried out by Muslims. The killing of various Iraqi, Afghani, Pakistani, African and Syrians is largely carried out by people who identify as Muslims. Whilst most Muslims around the world condemn such acts in the name of their religion, the fact remains that there seems to be a vocal group that portray our Prophet and hence our religion as one of violence, which is at odds with any form of peace and justice that the Prophet held as core elements of his message. The Prophet allowed free worship and practice by Jews and Christians. He granted amnesty to his enemies. He provided women's rights. He set up a welfare system. He established charity. He encouraged repression of anger and violence, and he encouraged strong family and social ties, irrespective of race and religion. These are just a few mere examples of what a once warring and tribal Arab community had come to adopt during the lifetime of the Prophet. Yet these instances are often looked by individuals to perpetuate the false narrative of a hostile warlord, which is a version that both terrorists and opponents of Muslims in general, out of hatred, share. You may ask and wonder at the place that Imam Hussain has such a hostile world. What are the lessons that we can gain from his sacrifice over a millennium ago, and how can we use them to create a world of peace? To gain such insight generally requires looking at the state of affairs during the time and how it relates to ours. Due to time constraints, I'm unable to go into depth on the extensive details. However, the opportunity may arise where I may be able to go into it in future. But, to be brief, the world of Imam Hussain was dominated by a dynasty who wielded power through lies, violence, and family affiliations or family ties. The environment of fear and cruelty was sufficient to silence the masses, who eventually became passive and blind to their crimes. Individuals who were consciously aware of their circumstances were often paralysed with fear and going against the status quo. Through tactics of alienation, extreme violence, and eventually death, which were employed by the regime. Imam Hussain, in contrast, rose as a true leader does and took the responsibilities of the community upon himself. His aim was to effect change within the passive psyche of individuals so that they become truly aware of their dire circumstances and act. The very words of Imam Hussain provide an insight for his vision and reasonings behind such a stand, in which he says that he had not taken the stand out of arrogance or pride, neither out of mischief or injustice, that he took a stand to reform the community of his grandfather, to bid good and forbid evil. In these short sentences and lines, the basic formula has been laid out for us. The basic traits to catalyse peaceful relations and coexistence with one another can only come about through leaving aside traits which may fuel egotistic or injustice in various capacities. We should want good for one another. These levels of thought can only come about through reformation of our own selves, first and foremost. This is a critical step, as it requires immense self-realizations, perceptive awareness, critical evaluation of our thoughts and our beliefs, and how implementation of our key values can add or erase these barriers of hostility in ourselves, which can translate into our community, society, and beyond. While such noble and courageous stand would eventually cost Imam Hussain and his family lives, it was his stand that was so robust that it acted as a catalyst for the eventual fall of the Umayyad dynasty. As Imam Hussain laid out in his letter, he went out with the intent to avoid violence at all costs. For this reason, he brought women and children to highlight to us that violence was not his intent, but rather it was the sole focus of those who opposed him. The focus of Imam Hussain was to awaken the people and make them realise that a life of fear and oppression is not a life worth living. As has already been mentioned, a once enlightened society had reverted to their various tribal furies and customs despite all the positive changes the Prophet had implemented. Had Imam Hussain ignored the pitfalls of society and given in to the bribery of Yazid, he realised that everything his grandfather had implemented would have been in vain and eventually led to the destruction of Islam itself. Whilst Imam Hussain did not go and seek a massacre, that is all that befell him and his family. Yet despite all the sufferings he endured, on that day he left us certain lessons by which we can implement and reach some level of peace and comfort in current times. In short, Imam Hussain was not going out to seek power or glory, but the principle of his opposition was so magnanimous that it has showered him with reverence and glory, irrespective of a person's religious affiliations. In today's world, peace is seen as an elusive concept, which sounds great in theory, but never in practice. It is a concept we view as within reach, but not worth grasping, due to the ramifications it may bring, which may impact us in various ways. War is a booming business, is now a mantra which can be seen through the trillions spent worldwide on arms sales alone, and which has been a central component to the current investigation of the journalist in the media, in which through arms deals and through pursuing arms deals, and that's been largely the reason that it's been overlooked for a long time, even though they've now taken responsibility for it. But yet it is due to a massive and billions of arms deal that this case is being overlooked, even though responsibility has been taken for it. Hundreds of billions are spent on spying by various governments on spying operations on their citizens. People in high government positions are funneling their wealth to offshore countries. Any person found to be revealing instances of government brutality towards its citizens can be charged with treason. All of this has been revealed in numerous WikiLeaks articles, the Panama Papers, the Snowden files and beyond. In short, the point I'm trying to get across is that in a world inflamed by hostility, news of such occurrences only fuels emotions of frustration, anger and humiliation. Instead, let us just ponder for a moment whether such wealth, or even a fraction of such wealth, was spent on eradicating illness, illiteracy, community projects, tackling issues of poverty, homelessness and addictions of various forms. One can only wonder, but we all innately know that at the very least the world would be at least a little bit more harmonious place to live. You may ask as to how people with meagre amounts of funds can impact such change to issues that require extreme amounts of funding, manpower and effort. Imam Hussain teaches us that no matter how dire the consequences, do the best that you can do, no matter how minimal it may seem. In situations of despair, the easiest thing to do is to give up, as that's what everyone else seems to do. But Karbala tells the standus, any small action in defiance of such dominating forces is better than no action. Whilst we should aim to change things internationally in terms of suffering that people endure through acts of charity and so on, the fact remains there is only so much that we can do. That the only real impact and lasting change that we can have is on our societies and on our communities. Peace at the microcosmic level can be reflected in the macrocosmic level. That's a belief that I hold. But only if we as individuals collectively allow it to. This begins by being at peace with your own self firstly, realizing our deficiencies as individuals and working to change them. If you are callous, practice being gentler. If you are miserable, practice more on giving. If you have a skill, practice sharing it and helping more people. Once you recognize and effect change in yourself, other people will notice, and this may be a catalyst for them to change some bad habits themselves. People may notice that you look more relaxed, refreshed, healthier, and inquire about what is different and do it themselves. A simple example of this, and I think all of us are aware of it, is generally when someone adopts a healthier lifestyle. They may lose weight. People ask them, what are you doing? They'll tell them they're doing a certain diet or whatever, but they take interest in it and they implement it in their own lives. Similarly, if we use our positive skills and we implement them ourselves, other people will take notice of it, and perhaps they may also implement it in themselves. By doing this can spread to others, and before you know it, what started from one person has suddenly spread to others, and so on. Taking the effort to step outside our comfort zones and interact with the communities in which we reside, taking an interest in issues that affect not us as Irish peoples, not only us as Irish people, as well as those which affect us as Muslim people, not being afraid to discuss various misunderstandings that people may have regarding our ideology and beliefs. Many of the questions that people generally have are of a genuine curiosity as opposed to complete and blatant disregard for our beliefs. Many people will base their opinions of Islam on how we conduct ourselves in the public domain and whether we take an interest in the various issues surrounding us. It is time that Muslims themselves extend their hand and take the initiative in a world of misunderstanding and confusion, especially in this age dominated by fake news and stark generalizations. As difficult an endeavour may seem, Imam Hussain has shown us that often, if you want a solution to the issues of the world, you can be the one to initiate it. Through the massacre of Karbala, a new movement was initiated, a movement of justice, compassion and mercy. Imam Hussain has laid down the foundation of peace. It is now up to us to implement it in our lives. What Imam Hussain started as a mission against injustice What Imam Hussain started as a mission against injustice and hostility of his time, it is now up to us to carry these lessons into our current situation so that we may add some fragment of peace to an increasingly hostile world. Thank you.
Many thanks. Many thanks, Zishan, because you have covered a huge area of the topics, the kind of international scenario, the present time that we are living at the moment, and the background of the turmoil of the history of Islam and the history of the situation that has in fact challenged the humanity. May I like to request the third speaker, Irfad Jafari, who is here, to come on the podium and present his paper. Thank you very much.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. I begin in the name of Allah, the most beneficent and the most merciful. Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters, and peace be to all the people who have gathered here today to remember Imam Hussain. I am here today to discuss a few points which may help to further show you that the Battle of Karbala was a tragedy forcefully imposed on Imam Hussain. Imam Hussain made many efforts of peace before the tragedy of Karbala could arise. Imam Hussain alayhi salam, as we know, is the descendant of the Prophet of Islam, the Prophet Mohammed. Keeping in mind the famous hadith of the Prophet, أولنا محمد وآخرنا محمد وأوسطنا محمد وكلنا محمد, which means the first is Muhammad, the last is Muhammad, and all are Muhammad. Muhammad adhered to certain characteristics of a personality described in the Quran. Do not be rude in speech, 3:159. Restrain your anger, 3:134. Do not be arrogant, 7:13. Forgive others for their mistakes, 7:199. Do not ridicule others, 49:11. Do not mix the truth with falsehood, 2:42. And decide on affairs by consultation, 42:38. These are but a few moral codes of conduct that Muhammad, his daughter Fatimah al-Zahra, and the 12 Imams adhered to in every single decision they made, before any thought that crossed their mind. All moral codes of conduct as described in the Quran were upheld by these individuals. Considering this fact, one should come to the realization that none of the Muhammads rose and will rise with the desire of war and oppression. That thought is far from mind. The infallibles engaging in war only arises when war is the only solution for the protection of Islam, the betterment of the Ummah, and the betterment of mankind in general. Whilst looking into the journey of Imam Hussain to Karbala, one does not need to be an expert historian to realize that the journey was not undertaken for war. Imam Hussain was traveling with women, with kids, and with our sick Imam Zainul Abidin. To any rational mind, a caravan like Hussein's is not one heading for war. To highlight that Imam Hussain wanted peace, I would like to quote his will to his brother Muhammad Hanafiya he made before leaving to Medina on the 28th of Rajab 60th Hijri. I have not risen to spread evil, nor to show off, nor for spreading immorality, nor oppression. But I have left for the betterment of the Ummah of my grandfather, and I desire to propagate the religion and forbid evil, thus following the steps of my grandfather and father Ali ibn Abi Talib. The caravan after leaving Mecca, 14 places are mentioned in the history books where Imam either stayed or met people or gave sermons reminding people of his status and his intentions of war, which were, like I said before, not to spread evil, not to show off, not to spread immorality, not for oppression, but only for the betterment of the Ummah. He reminded people 14 places across his journey from Medina, across his journey when leaving for Karbala. During his stopover in all these places, we see that Hussain made no efforts to mobilize any military support. In fact, at Zabala, after informing his companions about the death of Hazrat Muslim and Hani and the deceptions of the Kufians, he told his men, "Those who want to depart, leave now." No military leader leaving for war would tell his men to leave. The first responsibility of a military leader leaving for war would be to mobilize men. Imam Hussain was telling his men, "You may leave if you want to." Hordes of various tribesmen left, only 50 people remained with Imam alayhi salam. In Zuhazam, where he was interceded by the army of Hur, we see that Imam Hussain proposed to turn back, but he was denied and intercepted by Hur's army. In Bayธ์, he delivers his most famous sermon saying, "Do you not see to what low level the affairs have come down? Do you not observe that the truth has not been adhered and falsehood has no limit? And as for me, I look upon death but as a means of attaining martyrdom, and I consider life among the transgressors as nothing but an agony and an affliction." Even during the battle, it is apparent that despite of clearly being aware of his destiny which awaited him, martyrdom, Imam Hussain made every possible effort to remind people of his identity so they may refrain from the sinful act of killing him and his companions. It is only Hussain who thinks of even his killers at the time of him being killed. He thinks for his killers to save them from the hellfire in the time of his own death. Now on to the story of the warrior and the brother of Hussain, Hazrat Abbas, trained for battle by his father, the unrivaled warrior and unrivaled swordsman Imam Ali. Hazrat Abbas, with one signal of permission by his Imam, would have flattened the grounds of Karbala, leveling the hordes of Yazidi armies to sand. But Imam Hussain, not giving permission to his brother Abbas alayhi salam to fight, clearly indicates that they were not there for a war. Abbas did, however, go to the battlegrounds, but only to defend and to retrieve water for his thirsty niece, the daughter of Imam Hussain, Sakinah alayhi salam. If this is not indication enough that Imam Hussain was not there for war, then which father would take their 6-month-old child out onto the burning sands of a desert to ask for water for their child? If this was a war, Imam Hussain alayhi salam, the son of Ali alayhi salam, himself would have decimated Yazidi armies to get water for his child. But again, I remind you, Imam Hussain was not there for a war. Imam Hussain stood in Karbala to defend his honor, to defend his dignity, to defend his religion, and to defend humanity. Imam Hussain, the true victor of Karbala, the true victor of the tragedy of Karbala, inspired generation after generation of people to also take a stand against oppression. The last sermon of Hussain, which is right before his Shahada, as a reminder to all of us that no doubt these 14 infallibles are chosen and sent by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide us, but also they are a clear representation of God's peace and blessing on us. What does he say? Imam Hussain, I am the divine authority. Recognize me prior to declaring war against me. Beware, you will close all the doors of forgiveness by killing me. Again, I tell you, who thinks of their killer in the time of being killed? No normal man can do this. Only Imam Hussain, who thinks even for his killers, till the day of judgment he wants to save his killers by reminding them who he is and to prevent them from killing him. Such a personality such as Hussain can only inspire. It is far from rational to think a personality like Hussain can even be associated with oppression. I would like to end my speech by making a small contribution to what Imam Hussain is to me. The meaning of Imam Hussain in my life has grown. As I get older, grow maturer, learn more and understand more, Imam Hussein's importance and impact on my life grows with me. When I was a kid, he was just my Imam. He was my role model. But now he grows closer to be the essence to my life and my purpose. I aspire in all ways that I can be to like Imam Hussain. Every Muharram that comes and goes leaves a deeper and more meaningful impact in my life. Every Muharram reminds me of the true miracle that Hussain was for us. It's sad to admit, but I will never truly understand the extent of Hussain's importance on mankind. But in my life, I hope to walk down a path that slowly unveils the miracle that we call Hussain.
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you so much, Al-Fadl.
محمد وآل محمد صلوات.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. I mean, he is clearly a young man who is inspiring the thoughts of considering himself, walking along the path of Imam Hussain. This is a wonderful aspirations for a young man like him, who's just about to start his life in real world. May I like to invite the final speaker in this section, and then we'll have a 10-minute break after that. Zainab Naqwi, the lady who is one of the only lady I think we have a youngster in this section. Thank you very much.
Assalamu alaikum and hello everybody. My name is Zainab Naqvi and I'm here to speak about peace in Karbala. For anyone who's not aware, Karbala is the event that occurred 1400 years ago in which the grandson of the Prophet, Imam Hussain, was martyred by a dictator of the time called Yazid ibn Muawiyah. As everyone who's given speeches before me, very wonderfully might I add, has told you, Imam Hussain did not stand for war. Imam Hussain stood for peace. In this army of 72 of Hussain, when he fought this war, were Hussein's own brothers and nephews and sons, Ali Akbar, who was 18, and Ali Asghar, who was a mere age of 6 months. But what is Karbala, and why should any of us care about it? Karbala is an actual event in history in which the household of the Prophet Muhammad, his grandson Hussain, and Hussein's army of 72 were killed by the ruler Yazid ibn Muawiyah. It is a very important event in history and one that has struck the heart of millions. But I'm not here to talk about the event of Karbala. I am here to talk about what Karbala signifies, what it is a symbol for. Because Karbala is not just an event to cry over. It does not just belong to Islam. Karbala is for everyone. Karbala is a stand against injustice and tyranny of all sorts. Karbala was present when Nelson Mandela stood up against the apartheid rulers of South Africa and became the first black head of state. Karbala was present when Tarana Burke stood up and said "Me Too" when people were not allowed to do so. Karbala was present when hundreds and thousands of people stepped out of their homes for the March for Our Lives to end gun violence. Karbala is present to this day, but sometimes it is not in the form of peace. Sometimes it is in the form of what is considered the opposite of peace or justice. Karbala is present when there's a whole country of people, Yemen, who are starving to death. Karbala is present when the majority of the country is determined to die by 2019 because of starvation. Karbala is present when in 2012, UNICEF reported that over 500 children had been killed during the Syrian war, and 400 more were in prisons being tortured and executed. At the moment, in 2018, that number is 20,616. 20,616 children killed during a war that is so pointless. A war that has no proper basis. Can we truly think about that for a second? That is not an easy number to say. And this is only children. What about the rest of the innocents killed in both Palestine and Syria and Yemen? People who do not want to be involved. People who just want a good life and education. People who just want peace, who want nothing more than a normal life, their family. How can we sleep in our beds tonight knowing that just 5 hours away by plane, there are children being taken from their families, children executed, children who have not eaten anything for days on end? How many times will we stand up on these podiums and give speeches? How many times will we talk about humanity, about peace, and not do anything to impact what is happening in this world at the moment? How do we stand the injustice? Why do we stand the injustice? Let me tell you why. I have said this before, I have said this yesterday, and I will say it over and over and over again. It is because we are in our own worlds and our own ideals where peace is just an ideology that is not applicable to who we are as human beings. We are concerned with our own problems, with how we live our lives, how I didn't do my assignment for school today, I'm going to be killed in maths class. We care about what matters to us and not on a global scale what is happening. We are selfish. We need to look beyond ourselves and into the world. At this point, we are so divided we have forgotten what unity means. All of us here, everyone in this room, we strive for nothing but peace. Peace is what we need, not more wars or politics or hatred or anger. We need peace, but we do not have it. And perhaps this is when we know that humanity is at one of its lowest points. When children have to go out into the streets and say, no, it is not okay to have guns, we are scared for our lives. Or when women have to march the streets of their own countries and say, we want rights that we should already have. Or when children have to leave their houses and say, we do not want guns. We do not want to be afraid for our lives. Or when children have to stand up against war and say, we do not want more bombs. We don't want anger. We do not want hatred. When politics of rich men cause countries to crash and burn, and people who can help will not do anything because it's none of their concern. May I remind you, the Holocaust, World War II, for anyone who has studied history, was a mere 79 years ago. 79 years. Do we not learn? Will we never learn from the mistakes of our ancestors, from people? There are people who I know who are older than 79. We never learn. And is this seriously where humanity is? Where we repeat our own mistakes over and over and over again, where it is a vicious cycle? How can we complain about past generations when there is a war in front of our own eyes and we are not doing anything to prevent it? And this is why we need Karbala. As a reminder, and not even in a religious sense. If you are not Muslim, that is fine. You do not need to be Muslim to be human. Imam Hussain does not stand for Muslims. Imam Hussain stands for humanity. Imam Hussain stands for bravery. Imam Hussain stands for peace. Humanity and peace are the same. Imam Hussain did not begin the war. In fact, as I said before, as the speakers who spoke before me tried to say, he did not even begin the war. He tried to prevent it to all the means that he could. If you believe that Imam Hussain began this war for status or for power, why did he bring his family? Not the women, because I'm not going to undermine women by saying they do not belong in war, but children. His 4-year-old daughter and his 6-month-old son. Why did he bring them if war was his only motive? That is the answer, because war was not his motive. He did not want war. He was forced into what is considered war. He wanted peace. His daughter was killed in prison, and his son, a 6-month-old son who he had brought out to the battlefields of Karbala to ask for water. Hussein's family and army had not eaten or drank anything in 3 days. So he brought out his 6-month-old son, Ali Asghar, to ask for water. He was killed by an arrow. This is injustice. And it is not very different from what is happening nowadays. But it is something we must stand against collectively as human beings. I am not here to preach religion. I am here to talk about Hussein and his message that is at such a universal standard, more than religion. It is humanity, it is peace. So go read about it, preach about it, learn about it, educate yourselves, educate others. Be good, be kind. Learn about what is happening in the world when we are sheltered in our own homes. As you're walking away, think about what was said today. Perhaps give some money to someone who needs it sometimes. Remember that no act of kindness, no word spoken against oppressors can go to waste. Remember that, and remember Hussein and his message. Remember humanity and remember peace. Thank you all for listening to my speech.
I think doing rather than talking is an underlying message of this young lady, which is a very practical message. And doing any act, doesn't matter what act you do, even the act of talking about is an act of doing something about it. The world we live in at the moment is what it is, and we have to have an optimistic view, and we have to have a bigger picture in the context of what is happening globally. So it's a dichotomy of both worlds we live in. And I suppose that what stage you are at in your life, it depends how you react to it and what do you do about it. I'm sure that following speakers would be shedding lights on that. And I think we're tight with time, so I think we would continue rather than have a final break in the end after Q&A. We will have an opportunity to have a discussion among ourselves rather than one-way traffic. So without losing time in the break, I would recommend Stephen Farrell, Reverend Stephen Farrell, to begin his talk. Thank you very much, Stephen, for coming along.
Thank you for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, to share with you, to learn as much as I've learned already, although I do feel deeply inadequate having to follow the passion and the erudition of the previous speakers.
Height.
Yes.
Tall height would get you now. The mic should get you now.
Thank you, Suraj. My name is Stephen. I'm an ordained member of the Church of Ireland. And I thought as I begin, I might say something about the Church of Ireland, because there is no reason why anyone would know very much about it or be familiar with it in any detail. The Church of Ireland traces its roots back through St. Patrick, who brought the church founded by Jesus Christ to Ireland in the 5th century. And we are also part of that movement that in the 16th century sought a reformation of Christianity and ended up breaking away from the papacy and forming part of that group that we call Protestants. We see ourselves, though, as part of the one worldwide universal church, and so we still think of ourselves as Catholic to the extent that that means universal. So I see myself as both Catholic and Reformed. Now, there are not many of us in the Church of Ireland. There are about 126,000 in Ireland. And one thing that I've been told that we hold in common with Islam is that in Ireland we are both considered to be minority groups. The recent Education Act that governed admission to schools talks about a minority religion as being any group that accounts for less than 10% of the population. And it looks like that is every faith group outside of the Roman Catholic Church. No other group comes close to having 10% of the population. And it looks like no group will break through that barrier in our lifetime. Now, as we know, Ireland is still largely a Catholic country, and many of the other Christian churches have been shrinking. In the 2016 census, the only religious groupings to increase in numbers were the Muslim community, up by 29%, the Hindu community, up by 35%, and the Christian Orthodox community, up by 37%. These are very large percentage increases, but they still represent relatively small numbers, even in a population of just over 4 million. Now, it is possible when we look at the religious demographics in Ireland to say with some confidence that Ireland is changing. The population is changing, people's outlook is changing. We now have over 10% of the population who describe themselves as having no faith. It is not that they reject a faith, they simply say they have no faith. And so what does that mean for those of us in Ireland who are part of numerically smaller faith traditions? What do we do? I want to, for a moment, just dwell on that minority status, not as a negative thing, but as a strength. Because I think those of us who share in that label would be very, very well advised to support one another, to journey together, and to learn from one another as we live out our faith in our shared home. There is always a danger that in big national debates, the voice of smaller groups can get lost, or their voice can go unheard, or we can simply remain misunderstood. A case in point, and something I'm sure we all heard, was the speech that the Taoiseach gave when Pope Francis visited Dublin only a few weeks ago. The Taoiseach called for a new debate on the place of religion within society. Now, that speech was that speech was praised as, I know, yes, Freudian stuff. No, that speech was praised as being courageous, being honest and being direct. The Taoiseach called on Pope Francis to use the office of the papacy to ensure that victims of clerical sexual abuse receive justice, receive truth, and receive healing. But what received less attention in that speech was his call for a new covenant between church and state. A new covenant for the 21st century. A new chapter in the relationship between Ireland and religion. In trying to unpack what that vision might look like, the Taoiseach talked about a society where religion is no longer at the centre, but in which it still has an important place. A society where there will be a greater diversity and choice when it comes to school patronage, where there would be an ethos of civic and scientific attainment in our hospitals. And the Taoiseach then went on to ask the Pope for his prayers as we begin that journey together. What I would say about that speech is it sounded an awful lot like the Taoiseach considered this to be a conversation only between the state and the Catholic Church. Now, he may have been trying to avoid including others in the abuse and the failures outlined earlier in his speech, or he may simply have been guided by a realism that recognises that other faiths combined are still collectively smaller than those who recognise themselves to have no religion. That said, in an ever more pluralist society, any new covenant between Ireland and religion has to be cast wider. The conversation has to be wider. It has to include other voices and the insights of minority denominations and every faith, as well as the voice of the majority. Now, as a member of the Church of Ireland, I would be the first to acknowledge that my church does not always get it right when it tries to engage in public debates. And I imagine that you may too also suggest that none of us get it right when we try to engage in public debate. We sometimes fall into the trap of speaking to ourselves. Certainly in the Church of Ireland, we quite often make public statements that are aimed mainly at ourselves, and they make us feel better, and they help us to understand who we are, and yet they're not easily or widely engaged with by the wider society, nor are they easily understood, and they come to be ignored by those who inhabit a wider world. I think people of faith face an uphill struggle when it comes to being taken seriously as participants in these national debates. Because with a few notable exceptions, we have failed to address Brexit, the lack of government installment, the Irish housing crisis, and perhaps most of all, the fact that this generation is the first that cannot expect to have a better standard of life than their parents. What we have been quick to respond to in any national debate have been issues concerning sexuality or reproduction. And to society at large, it can seem that our focus is simply too narrow. For people of faith to enter a debate on the place of religion in society, we first have to find a God-inspired or a God-focused understanding of the nation and of society and of social encounter. We also need to ask ourselves and to be able to articulate why it is that we want to speak into the debate. It's not that any of us wish to force our views on others. Rather, it is that we don't want to see anyone have the views of others enforced on them. At its most basic, people of faith need to engage in the public square in order that the universal forces of what I might call secularism, secular liberalism, are not the only voices being heard in society. There is always the challenge that secular liberalism doesn't see itself as one of the players in the game, but rather it sees itself as the referee. It may allow some others a voice, but it will take to itself the right to decide the outcome. That is not how many of us will see the modern world making valid choices. Now, if people of faith are to speak into the wider society about the common good and the ordering of our national life, we must first, I think, work individually and together towards an agreed set of principles. An agreed set of principles to guide the development and the evaluation of public policy. And it is in fleshing out that idea of agreed principles across the faiths, that I want to conclude with. Now, if we take the work that we've already heard mentioned of the Three Faith Forum, if we take those three faiths, I suggest we would not get very far if we put representatives of each into a room and asked them to decide what they agreed on doctrinally. I think there's a chance that people would very quickly come to realize the things that divided them rather than the things that unite them. But my suggestion is that instead we can get people together from the various faiths and sit down with our legal texts, with our laws, with our moral codes, and see what common ground we have, and see if we can agree and find a set of shared principles there. This sort of comparative religion work hasn't happened much in the realm of religious law. Within Christianity, some work has been done to get Catholics, Orthodox, Anglican, Baptists, Methodists together and to work towards an agreed set of principles of Christian law. And I suggest that Christians and Muslims, or Christians, Muslims and Jews, could attempt to do the same. But why would we attempt it? Well, first, I think actually people would find that religious laws are much more pervasive and prevalent in society than is commonly presumed. They exist in the form of the constitutions of various religious bodies, they exist in the form of our various scriptures, and they exist in our traditions, in our history, and in our classical literature. Secondly, I think in the laws of Jews, Muslims, and Christians, we see the bodies, the religious bodies, trying to take the civil law and apply it to ourselves. We each have to deal with the law of the land. We each try in our own way to make rules to implement that for ourselves. And I think it would do society no harm to see that that is something we actively undertake. Also, I think the fundamentals of our religious laws are theocratic. They are sourced in the revelation of the divine law. Yet, at the same time, much of our religious law is temporal, secular, and functional. And a great deal of religious law is driven by civil law and the standards of wider society. And alongside these instruments, we also have our religious soft law, guidance, codes of conduct, and policy. And I think it would do us good to compare those to see just how much we hold in common. And I think it would be possible for us to find that there is something that you can identify as an agreed set of principles of religious law. Now, practically, I suggest that areas of common interest, such as the sources of religious law, the faithful, be they lay people or religious leaders, the institutions of governing religious bodies, discipline, dispute resolution, doctrine and worship, rites of passage, interfaith dialogue, property and finance, church and state. All of these areas would give us excellent starter points for conversation, that we could look at our respective legal codes, at our moral codes, and see what common ground we can find. A very practical example. If in the Church of Ireland we have laws and rules about child protection, if we take those and we compare them to the rules that you have around child protection, and we discover that they are essentially the same, well, very quickly we get to a point where we can talk about the need to protect children, the need to protect the vulnerable, as being a fundamental law of all religions, or at least of our religions. It becomes something that is bigger than either one of our faiths, and it takes on a flavour of the universal. As we better understand ourselves and each other, it becomes easier for us to interact with each other, but also to interact with government and with wider society, because we come to speak into debates from shared space, from a place of strength and from a place of mutual belonging. My hope is that together our voices have a strength greater than the sum of their parts, as we speak up for human dignity, for justice, and for mutual respect. Thank you. It has been an immense pleasure to be here.
Many thanks, Stephen Farrell, for your two thoughts that came out of his speech. Before we delve into our own detailed historical perspective of Muslims, and particularly in the context of Imam Hussain, as we a shared home and shared space, that we are living and working in a different space than the environment of Imam Hussain and the Karbala and the Middle East and so on and so forth. So therefore, it is very important for us to understand how we can actually bring Imam Hussain and introduce Imam Hussain to a different space and among the people who have a different aspect of life in relation to all the issues which relates to back to the bigger picture. May I now request Dave McInerney, our Sergeant Dave McInerney from the Garda Síochána, to say a few words. Dave is a friend of conference for many years. He's been attending and speaking about it, and he has a unique perspective on it. Thank you very much, Dave.
Siraj, just to say many thanks for the invite here today. It's always been a pleasure. Assalamu alaikum. And ashkurakum li du'atikum huna fi masjid. Just, you know, I went into work there a few months ago and I saw that the name of our office was changed. It was the Garda Racial and Intercultural Office. It was now changed to the Garda National Diversity and Integration Unit. And people ask me, Dave, is this a problem? Why are you calling it an integration unit? Do people have to integrate? Do we have to follow a certain party line? I said, no. I would say it would be integration with respect for difference, with respect for the voice of minorities, with respect for all religions that reside in this state. This is what it's about. Here today, it's an honour to be asked here on such a special occasion, the death of Imam Ali Hussain. What I have heard from all the speakers, it's been tremendous altogether. You know, he spoke about Imam Ali, his standing for humanity, for peace, for respect for all, without discrimination. This is what every police officer should follow. This should be the role of every police officer. Again, looking back at the office last week, many calls came to us. Many people from minority religious denominations calling us about the presidential election. But it wasn't about the president. It was about blasphemy. They were deeply concerned that a vote was to be put to the people about the removal of the mention of blasphemy within the Irish Constitution. They were concerned that could this actually leave them more vulnerable to religious intolerance. I reassured them that this would not be the case, that the Irish Constitution still protected people's right to practice their religion. This is the reason why people come to this country, whether they're Shia, Sunni, Ahmadiyya, Sufi, whatever, Orthodox, Hindu, that they come to this country to enjoy their right to practice their religion without discrimination. This is the message I would like to get through to you here today, and the fact that you're talking about humanity and peace. We want to maintain cohesion in this society, and this is why we have this special unit within An Garda Síochána, to try to learn about difference, to try to learn about respect for difference and the different religious denominations that live in this country. I see many people here today who have given our office tremendous assistance over the years. For 18 years now, I see Dr. Siraj here, who has always assisted us in relation to Shia Islamic protocols, what a police officer should know about respect, working with the community, and how not to offend people from lack of knowledge in relation to their religious protocols and practices. I see Mudaffar here also in relation to the Sunni community, who always guided us on how to police the community with respect for their religious differences at times of debt, at times of crisis, at times of heightened tension in relation to the possibility of hate crime against the community. He was always there to guide us. And of course, Mr. Adrian Christea, who has assisted us throughout the years to engage with all the different religious denominations here. It's tremendous every year here when you see the Garda Mass for deceased members, for Garda members killed in the line of duty, to see the Shia, the Sunni, the Sikhs, the Hindus, the Orthodox, all sitting in a line together with respect for each other, all proclaiming the mission of peace. This is tremendous, I think. I think it's a template of best practice that we are actually carrying through here. People say, well, we will learn from Europe, best practice from Europe. We will learn from other countries in relation to our best practice. My reply would be, no, I'm sorry, we don't really. We learn from mistakes that have been made in various other jurisdictions, where people were not respected because of their religious beliefs, where people were not respected by the state because of their colour, because of their difference, because of what they believed in, because of their political opinions. They weren't allowed to enjoy those rights. So I would say no, we try and learn from the people that come to this country about what it is they want from the police, what it is they want from the state, and what they want is respect, and to be treated with respect for their difference, for their religion, and that they feel part of the state, that they have a voice of inclusiveness, which is most important. And this is what keeps cohesion in society. So I ask you here today that if any of you are subjected to any form of disrespectful hate, racism, name calling, whatever it is, you must come and tell the police. If you don't want to report these matters, because many people don't want to have contact with the police, doesn't matter where you're from in the world, many people don't really like the police as such, going into a police station. It's not the most pleasant experience in some cases. But our role here, my role here, is to make it as pleasant as possible through your help. I know Siraj, Mudaffar, Adrian, other people here will represent their community and come and encourage them to come to the police. If there's any atrocities around the world, it can impact very negatively on people from different religions. So it's very important that people don't stereotype, that people are not subject to prejudice because of the actions of other people, people who are bad people. It's our job to ensure that everyone in this country feels safe and that they never will suffer the collateral damage from acts from people who break the law. So we ask you to please trust us, to come to us in confidence, to understand that we will treat you with respect for your difference, with respect for your vulnerability. So don't be worrying about the referendum that's coming up about this blasphemy and all the rest. Your right to practice your religion still stands. Your right to protection from hate crime still stands here, and we will ensure that it's upheld to the highest standard. I again thank you very much today for your invite here today, Siraj, and I look forward to meeting you in the future. God bless. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Dave. Over the years, as I said, we go back to almost 18, 19 years at this stage of the relationship of the first Multicultural Garda unit, which was implemented the concept of embracing the other community, embracing and working with the other community, because communities are so diverse in their beliefs, in their thoughts, and in their actions sometimes, that the bottom line is the cohesion and peace in a city which is now the city of multi-faith, multi-religion, and multiculture. And this is the work of the security forces, is to overlook the entire picture and to see what is required to mind those community, because everybody is vulnerable when it comes to, when you hear the program I shared on RTE last week on Friday on Leap of Faith. But before my program, the discussion was the massive hate crime in the UK is reported against Muslims. Now this is the latest, is the massive hate crime, not knowing who Muslims are, what Muslims are. Forget about the differences among the Muslims, groups of Muslims, but the hate crime against Muslims. So when you're trying to explain about Karbala and Shias and Sunnis and different Ahmadis and all the different faiths which exist now in Ireland, they all label you as a Muslims, and therefore can inflict the hate crime. So I thank you for your active, continuous support to us, to this centre, and to our sister centre and a brother sister centre in Blanchardstown, which is also in existence for the last 4 or 5 years. And so therefore, and to our other mosque and Islamic centres that you're very actively involved in the Clonskeagh and South Circular Road, the Dublin Mosque and all that. It is very important for us to feel comfortable about that we have a security forces which are our forces, which we feel very comfortable about. So taking out the procession of Ashura, which is a very important day for the 10th of Muharram, and Alhamdulillah, as we say, thank God that procession is now being well received, well protected, and with freedom. The first one which was planned, myself and this Iraqi fellow Akil sat together here overnight, discussed detail, and we said how we can execute that procession. It is just the way of explaining to the wider community what Ashura is about, why Imam Hussain, the day Imam Hussain sacrificed his life in the plains of Karbala, is the day of Ashura. That is worldwide phenomena that you would see in New York, in London, in Paris, all over the world, in Pakistan, in all the big cities. Madrid, big procession goes out. In Toronto, thousands of people go out on the street and just do the simple slogan, raise the simple slogan of Imam Hussein's sacrifice and martyrdom on the day of Ashura, on the 10th day of Muharram. Alhamdulillah, thank God that we have established that in Dublin with your help and with your sustain and support. Many thanks once again for coming along. May I request now to Pat Hines to say a few words. Pat, let me introduce you, honourable guest and ladies and gentlemen. Pat has been working with me over the years on the bigger picture of peace in Northern Ireland. And he's a peace ambassador in my eyes for the North and South peace. And in the context of, he has been previous attendance in the conference as well. This conference he had attended before as well. So it's important that Pat's view on Islamic picture in his work, in the context of his own work, we've explained that. Many thanks once again, Pat, for coming along.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. I am not an Islamic scholar. I'm not like any of the previous eminent speakers. But it's great to be here, and thank you very much for the kind invitation. In thinking about my remarks today, I'm conscious of the fact that many of you have spoken about Imam Hussain and of the history of Karbala and so on. I was very struck by the woman who gave an excellent presentation in relation to the spirit of Kabbalah, the sense of justice and so on that many of you derive from that piece of history. And I think it's important to maybe say to you that peacemaking and the development of peace as a concept is quite a self-challenging experience for any of you that have gone through the process of either mediating or negotiating even small disputes. And as I stand here today, we are 20 years since the signing of the Good Friday Agreement in Belfast between all of the parties to that particular conflict, which had characterised in a pretty definitive sense our modern history. The conflict between Catholics and Protestants, between Unionists and Nationalists for hundreds of years, but in particular in that particularly difficult period between 1969 and 1998. This weekend, in fact, is the 25th anniversary of the dreadful atrocity on the Shankill Road, where 10 people lost their lives in a bomb explosion. And so we remember the awfulness of the atrocities and the violence, and then of course the peace that came afterwards. The peace that we were all working towards and working for was very slow in coming, and the violence that occurred in the period before the signing of the agreement has left a huge mark and a huge legacy on people who remain deeply hurt as a consequence of the violence that had occurred. So in a sense, I think some of the lessons in terms of where I'm coming from, and I'm now responsible for the political dialogue and the exploration of the legacy of the violence in our Glencree Centre in County Wicklow, where Siraj and Dr. Ali Al-Salah has joined us, and many other of you have joined us on previous occasions. What we are trying to do now is to continue the journey of deepening the reconciliation and deepening the peace that was signed 20 years ago. And in a sense, peacemaking is a journey. You know, you don't front load the destination in the first few steps. You start the journey, you develop the trust, you grow in appreciation of the opinions and the experiences of the other, although you may have fundamental disagreements with them. But through the journey, through taking the time, your sense of yourself, your sense of your perspective about the other is changed. And there is a sense or a hope that previous speakers have spoken of, that we realise the need to develop and create a common home. So what is a home? A home is a place of comfort. A home is a place of safety and security, where we come for sanctuary, where we mind one another, where we look after the interests of each other. And that has been the journey and the experience that we have been trying to develop and create in the run-up to the agreement in terms of its signing in 1998, and then in the subsequent period of implementation and so on. But there remains, and I hear it from some of the speakers previously, a deep sense of hurt, even going back to Karbala, the sense of injustice, what happened, the loss of Imam Hussain and the other innocents and so on, who were working tirelessly to create a sense of justice and a sense of perspective around the humanity of all of us. And we're continuing that work in Ireland today. And I think it's important to say as well, to pay tribute to many of the religious leaders. I'm thinking in particular, Dr. Stephen Farrell spoke earlier on, but the role of Dr. Robin Eames as a Church of Ireland churchman was hugely significant, and his successors, Dr. Alan Harper, and even in our own city of Dublin, Dr. Michael Jackson, unique in their contributions, positive and deeply committed to the causes of respect and peace among society as a whole. So we have huge challenges, and all of you here have have unique contributions to make yourselves in terms of the experiences that you have, the experiences of your families far away. I think I heard Siraj the other day stressing the importance that while we live in a very fractured world, and violence seems to characterise in an increasing way more of the world, not least the Middle East and elsewhere, that it's important that we in our home here don't import the divisions that characterise the rest of the world, but that together, through efforts like this, can project out a positive image of unity, of purpose around what it is we want to do within our society, and that we project out a sense of respect among each other and care for each other and care for the interests of each other. So I think it is important, as I say, dialogue has been a key element of the work that we have been involved in. I'm reminded almost, I know I'm in a religious setting, and if you imagine going back to the earliest story of the First Testament, Cain and Abel, and you look at that story, and I read it as a child and it was taught to us in school, you leaf through the pages between Cain and Abel, but you don't hear that there was any dialogue between one and the other before the ultimate act of violence resulted in the death of one brother. Where was the dialogue? Where was the discussion? Where was the exploration of interests? Where was the, in a sense, looking at it in a respectful sense? And so dialogue is the answer to misunderstanding. Dialogue is the answer to an impulse towards violence, and dialogue is the answer and the method by which you will deepen the understanding of those who are different from you. But fundamentally, when you consider we're all human, we all share a common humanity, and as the young woman who spoke previously, the spirit of Karbala is about touching that humanity and seeing that humanity in the other person. Our identities, our religious expressions, vitally important in terms of who we are, but fundamentally deep within us, look into the eyes of another human being and start from a point of view of respect. The practices and the religious identity, of course, is important, but fundamentally we're all brothers and sisters. We're all brothers and sisters. I'm reminded of incidents particularly in Northern Ireland, where there was dreadful atrocities involving, both sides of the religious divide. But at the end of the day, who could tell the difference apart? The pain was felt the same. The losses felt the same by those who were left afterwards. So all of these things, I think, are important. And as I say, in a world that is increasingly fractured, this country, perhaps beyond more, and Dave has touched on this point, let's not import the mistakes or the bad examples that exist in other parts, whether it's of Europe or the rest of the world. Let's us all together, collectively, define a new image of what a society could be, and define what, as it were, a sense of respect and a sense, more fundamentally, of appreciation of the differences that we bring, because it's the differences that come into the collective that, in a sense, enriches us all. We learn from the different cultural and religious traditions and expressions and so on, and we're enriched by learning the various threads that run through different communities. This then is a weave within society. We're stronger together if we weave ourselves together more appropriately and respectfully. So my thanks to Siraj for inviting me, and my thanks to all of you for listening, and we'll leave it there.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
No doubt about it, one thing which we can take it is that we are stronger together with the community and with the support of the bigger structure and powerful systems that we respect and work with. Final speakers, before we go into the discussion, is Adrian. Adrian, thank you for your patience, for waiting for your turn. Adrian, let me introduce Adrian is a Dublin City Interfaith Forum that has been established recently, and the biggest achievement of this forum is the signing of a charter that we signed in the Glencree that was being mentioned by Pat Hines. The charter which enshrined the rights and a freedom of every religion to exist and to work freely in this country and to respect. And perhaps Adrian would touch on that charter a little bit. We have a copy of that here at this center. Each center has been contacted and presented the copy of that charter, and that charter enshrines the respect for all. So Adrian Christie, thank you very much indeed for accepting the invitation and coming along.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm delighted to be here today with you on behalf of Dublin City Interfaith Forum, and I'd like to extend my thanks to Siraj and the community here for inviting me here. I stand here before you facing two challenges. One, because the speakers before me were absolutely eloquent and have touched on so many important and relevant issues. And two, as the last speaker, I know I'm testing your patience. So bear with me. When Siraj contacted me and asked me to say a few words at this event, and by the way, it's not the first time I'm here. This is probably my fourth or fifth conference. Great to see it happening every year. It's important to keep it going. Well done. I hope next year happens again, and we try and open it even a little more to the wider community and let the wider community know about the importance of Karbala and the legacy of Imam Hussain. But like I said, we're privileged, I think. We're privileged to be able to gather here when there is so much chaos in the world. The speakers before me have outlined some of this, but I think we all agree that it's not difficult to see how quickly the world before us is changing fast, and not for the better, unfortunately. It's a little scarier now, with deeper divisions, polarization, a very serious challenge posed by migration, caused by wars, by climate change, by economics, reckless politics, and all this present us with deep challenges. We are also privileged and grateful, I would add, that Imam Hussain, through his example of selfless sacrifice, left us with a legacy that is so relevant today. It's inspiring us and giving us faith communities the moral courage to address all these challenges that have been outlined before us. And this is because and I'm going to try and use the term we right throughout my address, because it's about we being together, it's about working together and addressing all these challenges together. It's because we as faith communities have a huge role to play. Just like Imam Hussain just over 1300 years ago, we are all committed to values of justice, values of hospitality and mercy and peacemaking. We're committing to create a better understanding, relationship of deeper respect and acceptance of each other as human beings. Meetings, conversations, building relationships of mutual respect and trust with people of different faiths remain important, but I think they're more urgent in our contemporary context. We, as leaders and organizations, have to strengthen the efforts to improve religious knowledge and understanding. This will help people to challenge those who act out of prejudice and misunderstanding and engage in destructive behavior. In government language, we are invited as faith communities to contribute to the integration strategy towards building an inclusive society. And this type of society is a society in which there is a sense of belonging by all communities, in which the diversity of people's background and circumstances is appreciated, valued, a society in which similar life opportunities are afforded to us all. The barrier to this goal include mistrust between groups, lack of meaningful interaction, religious illiteracy, and lack of knowledge and understanding about our own faith and other people's faiths. We, as faith communities here, have a huge role to play. Faith is a life issue today. Hardly a day goes by without faith being a news item. Religious faith is a hot topic of discussion in the world, and religious and secular writers are engaged in the debate. We are now unavoidably faced with living faith and deep religious diversity. And religious and secular organization, both, are challenged to respond to our multi-faith society. In our own context here in Ireland, we are seeing significant changes. There is a developing secularism. This was already outlined by the speaker before me. There is a deepening diversity, not least a growing ethnic and religious diversity as a result of travel and migration. Many people are now coming to Ireland, and Ireland should rejoice in this and really express the ancient Celtic spirituality of welcome and hospitality. However, secular rhetoric about religion is often negative. We have to learn to live with and to cherish our religious diversity. Schools, universities, Garda Síochána, social and health services, other workplaces are all challenged to consider the implications of religious diversity as well as ethnic diversity. We're quite right to be concerned about how we increase the inclusion and participation of all residents in civic and political life, and to do all we can to reduce isolation, fear, racism, and tension within communities. Somebody mentioned the last stats published now in UK in terms of reports of hate crime. It is concerning that within a space of a year, there was an increase of nearly 50%. It was over 40% increase in hate crime. This, clearly those involved in government would want to work with faith communities to advance integration and address the concerns we all have. But I think there is an emphasis on us too, as faith communities, to continue with our vision to serve and keep hope alive. We are committed to God and we're committed to people. We are rooted in local neighborhoods as well as in worship and prayer. And I was very privileged last year in June to pray with the community here. I was very touched to have that opportunity. And we all have a strong desire to make life better for all. We want to address inequality, and we are well placed to relate to the most marginalized section of our communities. And how does this resonate with Imam Hussein's struggle over 1300 years ago? And I quote, "To eradicate corruption, undertake enjoining to do good, and restrain from evil. Because we, as faith communities, we provide values of hope, justice, hospitality. We do projects that make a difference and transform communities. So to bring it back to reality, on the ground, what can we do? We can meet with each other. We can talk to each other. We can build relations of mutual respect with each other and work together for the well-being of all. The challenge for us is clear. It's clear now more than ever. Work together, bring faith to public engagement. Engage in civic life. Exercise your right to vote. Make your voice heard and your vote counted. I was delighted to know Siraj's strong encouragement on WhatsApp for people to go out there and vote. Use your right, it's your democratic right, use it. Go out there and vote. Faith is our territory and our ground. We understand it. We are being invited to pitch our tent in the midst of public arena. A united, coherent voice is an important witness of faith. We can meet, listen to each other, engage in dialogue, keep dialogue going. We must challenge Islamophobia. We must challenge anti-Semitism. We must challenge all discrimination against faith and religious freedom. History shows faith communities have a strong theological and practical basis to protect minority rights and human rights, and also to promote social justice and welfare. We hold up the golden rule: only treat others as you want to be treated, with dignity, courtesy, and respect. We have a great deal of agreement on the kind of society we want to build and to be proud to live in. Siraj mentioned before, we have our interfaith charter to inspire our work. And I quote a paragraph of the charter that says, "To encourage dialogue between people of different faiths and beliefs in all spheres of life, to eradicate misunderstanding, intolerance and exclusion, and extend openness and understanding between our different faith communities." We've all signed up to this. Let's leave it. In the contemporary expression of interfaith cooperation, we, at the Dublin City Interfaith Forum, moved the idea towards a vision where local communities and organizations work together to counter and challenge hostility. The vision which, no doubt, Imam Hussain was striving for a long time ago, to create cultures of welcome and hospitality and safety for all, but especially for the most vulnerable residents. Again, we want to invite you all to work with us towards achieving these aims. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adrian. Time is now drawing to all concluding speeches, and this is what the Interfaith Forum is all about. Dave, you have to leave, I understand. Thank you very much. Again, once people will contact, just in case if we have any more Q&As to reach you further down. Thank you very much. Many thanks. The teaching of Imam Hussain and the remembrance of Imam Hussain going back to 1300 years, 1400 centuries, is relevant in our lives. If it's not relevant, then why are we here? And this is a thing, that we keep progressing, humanity keep progressing, making mistakes, sometime learning, sometime not learning. Our duty is to reinforce our forefathers' beliefs, efforts and sacrifices, that what we have made for the humanity. And that is the bottom line. Without losing too much time now, it's nearly 4:30 and time flies when you're actually listening to the wonderful speakers. Any question and answers rising from people's understanding, listening what we've heard, confusion, most welcome to raise those questions, and I'll try to help to facilitate with the speakers and with anybody who would like to say anything. Any Q&A, question and answer briefly we could have, otherwise we could have a tea and cakes and wonderful things that we have out there. Could be about any issue. Doesn't have to be about Imam Hussain, doesn't have to be about Karbala, because it's a history, and these days knowledge is not an issue. You tap it on a computer, you tap it on a keyboard, and you'll get everything. Sometime not correct. Yes, please.
So, Siraj bhai, I have a question for Pat. Since he was involved in the peace process, what would be interesting to learn is when the two sides started that dialogue, how did you frame the dialogue so that you could achieve some quick wins at the start and build that confidence?
Pat, that's a very interesting. Yes, please come down. It didn't take that long, by the way. It was not that quick. I can say that.
So you're obviously an Irish scholar as well, are you? Huh? How was it framed? So if you go back to the 80s, okay, so those late 80s, it was actually religious people who were involved. So there was Father Alec Reid, Father Jerry Reynolds, Reverend Ken Newell. Siraj actually met some of these guys over the years. They set about creating a context, a set of principles around which people could not entirely agree upon, but that you would have what was called a zone of convergence. So while the principles weren't exactly in alignment, they were in a zone where they may at one stage converge. And slowly through much more intensive dialogue, they did converge. And you then had the creation of a set of principles contained in the Downing Street Declaration, which was then announced by the two governments 25 years ago. Would have been around last year, this year. It was a painstakingly slow process, because each side believed fundamentally that engaging in the peace was going to secure their absolute demands. Their bottom lines were going to be met. But of course, as anyone will know, in the context of ending a violent conflict, you don't always get your bottom lines are exactly what you want. And slowly but surely, through the process of much more intensive and deeper dialogue, where people kind of decommission their mindsets about how they perceive the other. There was a slow dawning realization that it was a compromise ultimately that was going to have to be arrived on. But what the dialogue did, and I have to even admit this myself in the meetings I would have had all those years ago, my sense of what I believed was challenged. And so one goes on a journey around your own thinking, around what you started off believing and where you fundamentally then ended up. Because in the dialogue, relationships, and Adrian speaks about this, relationships get humanized. You humanize a relationship. You tend to look less at the ideological position of a person and much more at the human dimension in terms of how you want to relate to them. And if you're genuinely, seeking, as we all were at the time, I suppose, to end what had been dreadful violence, you're motivated by, in a sense, higher values and so on, to reach an accommodation, to make it easy for the other person in the negotiation to reach you, because you recognize, just as you're grappling with fundamental questions about your position and those that are standing behind you, your interlocutor that on the opposite side of the table is doing the same. So, where possible, you make it easy for the other person to reach you in a negotiation. So in a sense, all of that experience was what I suppose encouraged people to move into this zone of convergence, and then finally 20 years ago this year with Bertie Ahern and Tony Blair to sign on the dotted line. However, I would caution this, I'll finish on this, signing agreements, is one thing, but implementing them and creating the experience of peace is much more fundamentally important in ultimately resolving the conflict or a conflict.
Thank you. The challenge of conflict with us is huge, which you look at the international context, but in the local context, that's what it is. We sometimes are bogged down into the bigger picture which is out there in the world, and always the news that happens of the violence that is happening in the different parts of the world affects us badly. But in the context, bringing into the reality of our lives, we realize that sometimes things are in our control, sometimes things are not in our control. And that is the challenge for us, that how we can actually do, in a very simple way, of living in peace with each other among our community to begin with, and then to the community that is larger and a bigger community. Sometimes I reflect in ourselves as well. Within our community, sometimes uncomfortable voices, uncomfortable actions are being taken to hurt each other. In fact, voices, words being used, actions have been criticized, and that is not the right way of going forward. If you understand the other person's perspective, as Pat quite rightly has said, you reach to a much more peaceful, congenial environment and work very comfortably with that. Had that been the case in those days when the violence was a privileged thing, the situation would have been different. But taking the lessons from that violent situation and remembering, somebody have asked me this question at the interview in OTE on Friday, that okay, two communities had a schism, that is ism that exists, a violent division that exists. How can there be any opportunity or chance to come to peace and reconciliate each other? And I said the reconciliation work has been going on among the Muslims in the world today for the last 30 years, since the establishment of the peace among the Muslim community in the form of various dialogue, various discussions, in conferences such as Taqrib, the proximity of Islamic thoughts that I've had a privilege of attending in Tehran on a couple of occasions, where all Muslims have come together on one platform and discuss the unity, discuss the commonality, and discuss the how the bigger picture can be tackled. So the effort of peace is happening as we speak, and the more it'll happen, the more people who create violence and use division, religion as a pretext, an excuse to use for their own benefit and their own fulfillment, will be exposed, and eventually the world would realize that who are the real enemy of peace, in fact. And that's the note I would like to end my contribution. But any other question, if it's rising? Yes, doctor.
Again, the same thing to question to Pat. You maybe know we have a special situation in Kashmir.
Indeed.
Same thing, we have two nuclear powers with their daggers out all the time regarding Kashmir. So our leader had come to Northern Ireland to study there. His name is Maulvi Farooq. He had come to study their, Good Friday Agreement and the Constitution. How there was I think it was Musharraf's time, there was a thought process that we may go in the same lines and as Good Friday Agreement in Kashmir. But I just want to ask him, it seems that we have a problem with the political goodwill, and then there are counterparties which create some military actions just to not allow as soon as they come together. Sometimes there is from the Indian side, sometimes there is from Pakistani side, there is some clash or some killings or some terrorism happening, and it is being sabotaged. So what was the thing which overcame that all in the start of this peace process? Was it a political goodwill? Was it the militant parties just kind of just left that and they said no, now it should be the political dialogue which should be the go ahead? What exactly was that stimulus, that catalyst really generated it and left that all? We are this time, I'm telling the Kashmir situation, we are in this.
The decommissioning and the reduction of violence.
This is a big question. The Irish experience was caught up for a long time in land and territory. We thought in territorial terms about the conflict that went right back to the 17th century, when land was taken from and people took possession of, alienation and separation, leading to deep-seated senses of injustice at what was taken from them. And in particular, the 30 years of the violent campaign witnessed some of the most horrific incidents of violence, forcing many people to ask themselves, what was this for, what was this about? And in a sense, the remarkable achievement of somebody like John Hume was to reframe the argument out of the territorial into a popular sense, or about people. So how could we detoxify and detune all of the hurt that was felt in terms of the dispossession, okay, and to, in a sense, release ourselves from feeling as victims of history as Irish people, but reinvigorate ourselves with a sense of writing new history. So the way we were going to write new history was to create a unity of purpose among peoples, not the territory. Now, he drew a lot of his inspiration for that from the European experience when he stood on the bridge in Kiel between Germany and France in Strasbourg and said, look, the French are still French and the Germans are still German, but they will actually work together in their common interest, because they were only secure together, not standing suspiciously apart. And in a sense, the Irish experience has been to do the same, has been to take out the territory. And as he said himself, I heard him speaking 30 years ago, you know, it fundamentally is about people and how they relate to each other, not the territory. We'll be buried in the territory in 70, 60, 70, 100 years anyway. We'll be buried in it. But living today, the experience of creating a society at ease with itself is about how people relate to each other. And that, in a sense, does require political visionaries. He was an extraordinary person. We were extraordinarily lucky that this man, coming from Derry, coming from where the experience he had this ability to see things in human terms and not fall into the sectarian trap. Because in a sense, sectarianism is very often about, you know, not a thought process, but a thought process. Okay? So he avoided all of that and focused on the humanity of people and the...
What was his name? What did you say?
John Hume. John Hume. So that visionary thinking on his part was hugely important. So, you know, he took the territory out of the argument, that age-old argument, and focused on a unity of purpose among peoples. Now, you know, in conclusion, a lot of what he managed to achieve, those very, very fine balances. Obviously, Brexit puts a lot of that under pressure, shall we say. And I'm being judicious and careful in my expression around that. But, you know, the hope would be that in Ireland that we continue to see, you know, not the territory, not the lines on the maps or anything like that, but the cooperation among peoples. The need, and I said this earlier, the need to mind one another. We have to mind one another. We live and inhabit this small little island, and we got to look after each other's interests, regardless of what happens.
What was what I felt being a doctor and working with other people, it was a pressure from the masses as well. The people started feeling for it.
Yeah.
This is madness.
Yeah.
What were we doing? So I think that was also a good contributory factor, the feeling and the wave from the masses. Even now that is like, you see the Brexit, the Northern Irish were a majority against that. So they feel that that's not going to be good for us. So it is the masses, once the masses start feeling about it, then the leaders speak the same language. So I think if it is that way, even the Brexit cannot do anything with that.
I think, you know, it's a fair point. It's about having the vision and displaying the leadership. I mean, Hume went beyond himself. He said things that were controversial within his own community about, you know, the need to accept and respect that a large body of opinion did not share an Irish nationalist viewpoint around unity or whatever. But it stopped becoming about unity and started, as I say, becoming about a unity of purpose and a relationship between people who are different. Because without the relationship, nothing would change. Violence had simply deepened our problems over centuries, and in particular the 25 years. But if you could create a relationship and ask the question to all of us and who were young at the time, I suppose, well, how are you going to relate to those who are different from you? Accepting all of the legacy of history that was handed to us. We could continue living that legacy that was handed to us, or we could write new history. That was the challenge. We could do as we did before, or we could take up a challenge which was very challenging and required people to go beyond themselves and come out of their comfort zones in terms of the rhetoric they would have used. And he managed to, as it were, inspire. Well, 94.6% of the population down here voted for Good Friday, and over 70% in Northern Ireland. So there was an overwhelming endorsement of what he had been saying all those decades previously. So courage, patience, humility to understand that you know, your own self, your own community doesn't have all the answers. It simply has an experience of what it would like, but it's not necessarily the answer. And to be humble enough to say, there's somebody else with a different perspective here that I have to accommodate in order that we more appropriately, as I say in the first instance, relate to each other and then work out how we share the space.
Thank you.
That's a tough one now for Kashmir, but you know.
Thank you. See, just to fill you in on the Kashmir issue, it is a the vast issue, obviously. Unless you have humility and respect for each other, which doesn't exist there. Among the Indian side, among the Pakistani side, there's a deep hatred. And in the current political climate, in an Indian context, deep hatred about the Muslims and about the Pakistanis. So therefore, it would not be a peace. On the opposite of peace, violence will continue. The level of army has increased under the current legislation and the government of BJP, who's in power. So these are similarly in the Middle East. If those deep divisions would extend to the public, respecting public, then humility. I think in Ireland, the perfect example in Ireland was that in Ireland people did respect each other. They said, fair enough, you can have Catholic views, you can have Protestant views, but we do respect for the sake of peace. That does not exist in Indian and Pakistani context. If they would have allowed to vote in 1947 to plebiscite under the United Nations, the situation would have been solved at that time. That didn't happen. So it's a deep political problem, and it's an international problem. And many complex layers upon layers upon layers exist on Kashmir. Any other questions?
Just I'm asking about same person, Mr. About the length of the conflict. I'm not sure historical point of view. What's the length of conflict between North and South? And do you think the length of conflict is contributing factor to delay the process of agreement? Because we can take an example, Kashmir or like Arab-Israel conflict. It's very short time compared to the length conflict between North and South. Is it 200, 300 years? I'm not sure really, historically.
President Mary McAleese said that the length of time required to resolve the conflict may well be as long as it took to practice the conflict. Now, depending on what date you take in history, 1169, 1607 to 1620 at the plantation, 1800, and on it goes. I think 20 years since the signing has been a blink of an eye. We've done extraordinarily well, given the depth of the violence that was practiced and the incredible levels of hurt. I mean, there were almost 4,000 people killed, 3,800. There were 40,000 incidents of violence, so bombings and shootings, explosions and so on, 50,000 casualties. And since the signing of the agreement, the trauma alone in society has left 4,000 people dead by suicide. Such has been the depth of the trauma that has gone into society. So it's a hugely complex question. Violence is perhaps the most corrosive practice by human beings towards other human beings. It's so corrosive, it's so deeply damaging, not just in a personal sense on people, but in the context of communities. Because when violence is done to a member of a community, the whole community feel that act of violence. So it has a very, very corrosive effect. Today, much of my work in Glencree is unpacking and very, very carefully exploring the effects of this to ensure that people find some measure of would one say, acceptance of what had happened, or attempt in some ways to find answers in order to come to terms with what has happened. So in a sense, it's going to take quite a while for the feelings of enmity, the feelings of hurt, of loss, that was created in that 25-year period of sustained violence. How long it will take is very difficult to tell, but one thing is absolutely certain, that if people don't get up every day and make an effort to keep the level of understanding constant, to, as it were, stabilize any kind of senses of estrangement or distance between the communities, then it's easy to slip back. So while violence is practiced and so on, peacemaking is in some ways an even bigger effort, because you're trying to stop the boulder coming back down. You got to keep the effort pushing the boulder up the hill, and that's a difficult challenge in the context where so many people are hurt, so many people are demanding answers to questions, and in a sense the why their loved one, why their community, why their village, why their town happened to be the incident or the centre of whatever incident had occurred. So we have huge challenges to continue this. As for how long, I suspect we just have to keep going and keep going and not put a time limit on it, because the reality of human relations is that despite everything, we have to work every day to improve them, to deepen them, and to ensure that the corrosive impact of violence never gets in between us, to create the kind of experiences that we would have had 25 and 30 years ago.
Thank you. Dave, any other question for Pat?
Adrian Christie should answer some questions. I noticed Dave McInerney slipped out.
Many thanks.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for concluding. It's nearly 5 o'clock. I'm really grateful that everybody turned up. Those who wanted to discuss this bigger picture in the context of Imam Hussein's context, because Imam Hussein's context is the largest conflict that happened 1,400 years ago and lived on. And I must conclude that very note that living on a legacy of a bigger conflict, which was at the time looked at as an ordinary conflict between the two clans, so to speak, individuals who followed the lineage of the family of Prophet Muhammad, and they were immediately persecuted by the people who were in power and political power. But that taught us a lessons over the history, bigger revolution. The Iranian Revolution is the perfect example that it succeeded in the world because of that revolution. Because of Imam Hussein's spirit has been implemented. Similarly, in different parts of the world where those spirits have been implemented. So this kind of complexity that is happening in the world would never solve these problems, but we should be hopeful and keep the optimistic view of the resolution, that one day they would understand this conflict, which has started 11 centuries ago, now is in peaceful, now relatively a northern and southern problem has been solved. So eventually, perhaps not in our lifetime, but perhaps in the future. But most important thing is that the history of Imam Hussain taught us to live in peace among people who belong to different faith, who belong to different same, maybe within Islam, there should be no division as such. There should be cohesion and working together for a bigger enemies who are out there to damage and to destroy perhaps the faith of Islam, and which are out there, no doubt about it. And that shows that bottom line for them is business.
as previous speaker Zishan has quite clearly, as bravely has mentioned, the issue of arms and all that. So the reality of capitalism and wars, and in Kashmir that is also being implemented. The amount of arms have been sold to India. Unless there is a no conflict, there's no arms resolution. So it's a bigger discussion and a bigger bring it back to the paying homage to the Imam Hussain and his sacrifice. I think his sacrifice explains it all. That if you have everything, you give it to the sake of peace, and that is Islam. Bottom line of Islam is peace. It's not violence. And that is where I would end my discussion, is that I always say in any forum and in any discussion, bottom line for Islam is peace, not violence. And unfortunately, majority of the world understands in the other way around. Because small bunch of people have been hijacked and been pumped arms, money, whatever you call it. Those states who do it deliberately, openly, they will be exposed in time. Imam Hussein's killer was one individual, but that individual's then it was exposed, and eventually the entire Umayyad dynasty was, fallen, because people realize, when people realize, oh my goodness, what the biggest injustice done to the family of Prophet. He was a grandson. They slain not him, but to all his children and family. So people do rise and they realize the injustices that has been happening, and that is the law of nature. I think the law of God, Allah, whatever you call it, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala understand the nature of humanity, I think. And the bottom line for nature of humanity is peace, living in peace, and providing the basics for humanity. That is what is required for us to, once again, I would like to thank everybody who participated, and please continue to look for solution for those problems that you heard today, and work together. If you have any problems, we can always discuss and support each other. Many thanks for coming along. Please make sure that you do have not one but several portion of the food which has been ordered out there. Thank you very much for coming along. Thank you.
Shama